Hello everyone, welcome everyone at home. Good afternoon, I'm Jess Rogers and welcome to the Women in Sport virtual conference, Everything in Sport Women's Edition. We're delighted to be here and actually we're in a little studio here at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Feels a little bit like the breakfast show but with the afternoon and we're everything in sport, and we're here to have some really great discussions about women in sport. And of course this is a prelude to the event in June, on the 7th and 8th of June, which will be held here in person at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And there are tickets available now. Early bird offer is still available for £499. So make sure you check out the Everything in Sport website. Make sure you follow us on social media too. But anyway, enough about that. We have got some absolutely stellar speakers lined up today, and we're going to be covering 5 different core themes over the next couple of hours, and that is education, regulation, gamification, stimulation and innovation. Now, each speaker is going to bring to life this in a different way, but before we really get stuck in, I'm delighted to be joined here on the sofa by CEO of Omnia Sports Group, David Crayling. First of all, David, why are we here? Omnia Sports Group and Everything in Sport. Tell us a bit about that.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, so Omnia Sports Group, it's for us, it's all about sport for social change. It's about ensuring that we can work with local communities and societies, make them better places, economically and socially, and through the power of sport and physical activity is a very, very good way of doing that. The Sports Group is about ensuring that we drive equality in what we do, inclusion, and every person in every life gets a chance to do that. So it's looking at that culture, that society, and in essence how we can help support people having better lives through the key themes that you just described. And there is an example education, and how children can understand why education is important for them and why they can also enjoy having fun through sport and activity. Everything in Sport is a brand within the Sports Group.
Yeah.
And the Sports Group is about ensuring that we cover the diversity that's needed around the world.
Yeah.
We have 5 stars within our logo for Everything in Sport, and that's the 5 continents around the world. I'm really pleased today to know that people joining around the world are from all 5 continents today. So I'm really pleased about that, and thank you for attending, everyone. And in relation to the bigger impact over time for us, 29% of the world's population are children under the age of 18, but they're absolutely 100% of our future. So if we can still and focus on those, but today is about our women's edition. So why our women's edition? Women are more than 50% of our population and have a huge influence in society as we move forward. So if we can understand some of the challenges, why some of the behaviours are there within sport, and we can address them collectively, we should have a better society to move forward.
Absolutely. And why is that important to you?
Because I think that for my many years of work, it's understanding that there's a mix between education, community, and sport brings together, confidence, resilience in children, as well as people. We all like to be confident in what we want to do, and that comes from places. Behaviours are learned, and if we can create environments that promote better, safe behaviours, again, those children, which are our future, the world can be a better place.
Absolutely. And today is our women's edition, and obviously it's a precursor, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To June, and you're excited about holding this first one in person.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's ironic it's London. London's the start, and we will go to other parts of the world. But London for us, if you've looked, we have an amazing set of speakers, all subject matter experts in their own right. And today is about showcasing some of those speakers that will be at the conference in June.
Absolutely. Well, we'll get started then, yeah?
Thanks very much, Jess, yeah.
Thank you, David. Okay, so the way today is going to work, we're going to explore each of those 5 themes, and then we're going to end with a bit of a Q&A. So the last 10 minutes will be a Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll come back to some of them at the end. But first of all, our first theme is education. And now education is so important to all of our lives, and sport is not apart from that in any way. For our first theme, I'm going to be talking to Anna-Marie Phelps and Rob Young. Anna-Marie Phelps is CBA OLY and is Chair, UK Secretariat, Co-Chair and Global Exec of the International Working Group for Women and Sport. And Rob Young is co-founder of Switch the Play Foundation. And first of all, I'm really excited to be joined by Anna-Marie. Yes, Anna-Marie, I can see you. You're our first speaker, so it's working. Can you hear me? We are having...
Clear.
Yeah, Great, great, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, Anna Marie, I know that you're such a big part of the international working group for women and sport. Can you tell us a bit about how it works, and also why is it so important in the UK?
So the International Working Group on Women in Sport, we call it IWG for short. It's much more less of a mouthful. It's unusual in that it's a network. It's not really an organisation, and it came out of a call to action from an international women in sport conference, which was held in Brighton in 1994. So next year is our 30th anniversary, and we're really excited to have the secretariat, the sort of the working bit of that, back in the UK for the first time since then. So what we are really is a network of organisations, government, sporting organisations, national, non-governmental organisations, who have committed to improving gender equality in sport over the last 30 years. Every 4 years, we move the working bit of it to another part of the world. So before the UK took it over in November, it was in New Zealand. Before that, it was in Botswana, and it's been in Japan and North America, all around the world. And essentially, our main role is really just to try and review and connect and report on progress in gender equality in sport. So we have a 4-yearly publication which reports on progress. We have a 4-yearly congress, which will be in Birmingham in 2026. And the rest of the time, we have an insight hub, which we have on our website. We build partnerships and, really work on advocacy for gender equality across sport.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful to get that context. And IWG has been doing this for 30 years, but, do we still need it as it is?
Some people would say not. I think a lot of people look at the success of the Women's Euros this year, the success of the Lionesses, how much TV coverage and media coverage they got, and they say, really, do we really need this anymore? We've had plenty of coverage. Women's sports there, it's getting sponsorship, getting money. Serena Williams is such a big star. Our cricket team are doing well. But if you look and scratch underneath the surface, and I'm sure the other speakers will come to this later, particularly at grassroots level, there's an enormous amount of inequality. If we look at who gets priority on pitches, public pitches in the parks and schools, it'll tend to be the boys' teams, and the girls will be given the worst pitches at the worst times. If we look at medical care and medical research, and I'm sure Emma will cover this, so little sports sort of physiology is based on women's bodies. We talk about kit. Interesting reading Isa Gur's article this morning. The girls that she's talking to who are still worried about having to wear whites, during their menstrual cycle. So there's so much still. There's so much inequality at all levels, and in the lack of leadership and investment in women's sport. We're nowhere near it in this country, and we are ahead of the pack internationally.
Well, that's great to hear that the UK are leading the way in that way. And I know you mentioned some of the things there, but what are the most significant things that need to change or improve the balance of leadership within women's sport?
Well, I think if we think about leadership as being anybody who's in a decision-making sort of position, we're not just talking about chief execs and presidents or chairmen of sporting organisations, of whom there are too few women already, certainly in this country and globally. But we're also talking about coaches, so that there are leaders on the ground who can talk to young girls and to women who aspire to be leading athletes. We need more women who are refereeing or umpiring, and just being seen to be leading things. And we need more women, not just sort of in leadership roles, but we need more women of different backgrounds. Again, going back to Isa's article, she talks about being the only South Asian woman that's ever played cricket for England. And, when you think about the history of cricket in this country, that's shocking. We know that there are enough women who are well qualified to take up those positions. We know that, we just need to change not just change their perceptions, but actually to push them towards standing up and putting themselves in a position to get into those roles. But this is a two-way thing. It's not just about the women having the confidence. It's also about having male allies there who will see that they need to try and encourage women to do it. There's an awful lot. There's an awful lot that needs to change. We need to change the way that we recruit people and appoint them, and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned before how there is so much inequality still with the sports pitches and the kit and everything, but we have made some progress over the last 5-10 years in particular. Are there any key things that have really come out of that for you that you're really pleased to see?
The visibility of women's sport is vastly improved. We do see, when I was growing up, the only women's sport that was on television was probably Wimbledon tennis. There were women on TV playing sport, and once every 4 years we'd have gymnastics at the Olympic Games in the 70s. So to see football regularly being pushed on the television and regularly being in the papers is fantastic. But it isn't enough, really. It is generally, you have to find it, you have to seek it out. The scheduling could be much better. We all know the discussions that there have been around the use of big stadia, and we've seen now that women's sport can fill big stadiums. So there is progress, but it's been slow.
But are you hopeful, Anna Marie? Are you hopeful for how things are going?
Of course I am. But I do think we need a bit of a revolution still. There's still some big stuff that needs to change. And we really do need to sort of reevaluate what the values of sport are and how we measure success, and not just always in terms of the traditional measures of success that we have, because sport wasn't set up for women in the first place. So, we just like to shift it a little bit and be a little bit radical around that.
Well, speaking of that and being radical, if there's one thing you could change about the current system, what would it be and why?
Well, I think it would be just that. I think it would be, complete review of our system that we have for appointing and electing people, around some of those systemic barriers that I think are probably there in football, the values that we have. If we measure success as always just being the fastest, the strongest, the highest, all of those things, women, because of they're physically smaller and physically less strong, are always going to be second best. And if people get promoted into decision-making roles because they're the best, then it's going to hold women back. So we really need to look at those sorts of systems, and look at how we value women's input to sport.
Absolutely.
But we'll get there.
We will get that, and we are making such good progress. And things like this today, we are having more and more events which are solely focused on women. But then, there is the discussion whether women's sport should be separated from sport at all and called women's sport. Have you got a view on that?
I change my view from time to time. I think I do think it's great that we now talk about men's football and women's football. I think that's a massive step forward, and I think we do need that. I think there is a case for having some separation to some extent, because I think women do need, particularly at a younger age, they do want to grow up and to build that confidence in a safe space. Yeah. So, it gives them the opportunity to test things out. So I think there's a little bit, I'm not one way or the other, actually. Definitely. Jury's out.
And it often depends on the situation, doesn't it, and the sport itself, and in the context of what it's being discussed. But Anna Marie Phelps, CBOLY, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us today and kicking off our women's edition of Everything in Sport. And we hope to catch up with you again soon. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that was Anna Marie Phelps, and what a great start to today's conference. Next, we are going to continue talking about the subject and theme of education, and I'm going to be joined by Rob Young, MBE, who is the co-founder of Switch the Play Foundation. Rob, I see you on the screen. I think we've got you. Hello.
Hello there, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thanks. Having a great time. I want to kick things off actually by asking you, what is Switch the Play Foundation? Can you give us a little, info on that?
Yeah, certainly. So we're the only charity in the UK that exists to help all sports people across all ages and stages, to successfully prepare for their futures. So helping them to thrive, not just through sport, but also in terms of their preparation for life beyond sport.
And, how long have you been doing this for? When was it set up?
Yeah, so I was one of the original co-founders. We set it up back in 2014, originally as a social enterprise. And I guess very much at the heart of what we do is around trying to place the needs of the individual. And so we've always been very philanthropic in our outlook, and eventually made that transition to charitable status in February 2020. And over the last 12 months, we've supported just over 1,000 athletes in different ways and forms across 22 different sports. So, from where we started out with an idea and a lot of naivety, very proud about the progress that we've been able to make and supporting people in a really positive way.
Absolutely. And why does sport, in your opinion, have a duty of care to look after its athletes, after they finish their professional career or during it?
So I guess there's a couple of reasons, and I'll start with the moral one. Ultimately, the well-being of sports people should not come at the expense of our enjoyment of sport as administrators, as fans, as sponsors and organisations that benefit from sport. Absolutely, the duty of care of the individuals that make sport happen should be at the forefront of our thinking. And I don't think many people would argue with that now. I would hope not. And I think there are lots of great people and organisations that we work alongside that really care and are really making a difference. However, I don't think sport has got duty of care right. In the bit of it that we operate, I guess the education and transition piece is a part of a broader duty of care conversation. Ultimately, we still see too many sports people, and you see too many examples of sports people that talk about actually wishing that they'd have had more help or a different type of help and support through their journey. And so until we can work through that, I guess there's more work to be done.
And speaking of duty of care, in terms of athletes after they finish their career, what is the type of care available for like men and women? Is there a difference at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. That's part of what we're working with organisations to understand. So a lot of it starts from asking the athletes and finding out what those particular challenges and issues that they might be facing through their career cycle. I'm actually in the process of pitching for a piece of work on a very similar theme as it happens. But I think that's the key thing. And ultimately, while you see common themes like identity being one of them, the nature of different sporting pathways looks very different. And actually, one of the challenges that we're seeing with women's sport and the growth that Anna Marie's talked about is where traditionally some of those sports have always been dual career in nature, in the sense that the athletes have known that they needed to do something alongside. Actually, with some of the success can actually be the aspiration that actually it becomes the only thing. And actually the downside of that could be that people are not thinking about how they might develop themselves more holistically alongside their sport. And
why is this consideration for a plan B so important?
Yeah, so that's the other bit for the duty of care conversation. So it might sound slightly contradictory for a charity that supports people to prepare for the future, but we don't like to use the term plan B personally, because I guess in life, when do you ever put as much effort into plan B as you do plan A? And we like to talk about this in the context of an extension of your plan A. And actually, if we talk about education and developing yourself as a person only in the terms of preparing for the future, yes, some people will listen, but I think we limit the scope of who will actually engage with us. And ultimately, if we're talking about this being a prevention model, we know that over 70% of sports people leave sport not by their choice, deselection, injury, etc. Actually, we're missing a huge swathe of people that could be engaging in this. And I'm reminded of a recent conversation with a Paralympian, and she said, if you talk to me about retirement and planning for life beyond sport, I'm not listening because I'm still thinking about my sport. If you talk about working with me to help make me a better person, I'm all ears. And I think that's a really important part of the messaging. And actually, there is a growing evidence base around how sport and developing yourself holistically actually will help you to be better at your sport. And it's not just about preparing for the future. And I think that's a really important message to get through. There's lots of great examples of sports people that are doing that at the moment. And I think that's a really powerful part of this, to think about this not just as the duty of care of what we have to prepare people for life beyond, but actually this stuff will help people in terms of their well-being and helping them prepare to be better at their sport as well.
Definitely. And speaking of women in particular, does Switch the Play support women who, choose to go have children during their career and come back?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be perfectly honest, a major driver to why we became charity is around the inequalities that exist in sport. If we wanted to genuinely be there to support all sports people and finance not being a barrier, the realities of, and it's not just in women's sport, and there are obviously other sports that are smaller in terms of resources, but unless we were able to become a charity, I guess that the opportunity is that those people who need help can't access that support. What's really positive now, actually we've had a member of staff who's actually gone through this journey herself, is there are more and more female athletes that are now making that career choice to say, actually, I'm going to have a baby and then I'm going to come back into my sport. And I think that's really powerful because actually, again, it's setting the path for future sports people who are coming through to recognise, actually, this is something you can do. And actually, you can still thrive at the top of your sport as a mother, as a parent. And I think that's a really positive message to get across in society as well.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that'll be like everyone on this conference today is going to be all ears to that. And it's becoming more and more frequent, isn't it? I spent a long time working in netball, and when I first started working in it, basically no one had gone off and had a baby and come back. And now it's just becoming more and more frequent. It's amazing to see, and it's amazing to see organisations supporting people to being able to do that. But I want to talk about the conference in June. You're actually going to be chatting about our stimulation theme then. Can you tell us a bit about what you're planning to talk about then?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's obviously exploring a bit more around some of the themes that we just obviously touched on today. I think there's something really important around how the sporting system at large can collaborate more effectively to support sports people. When you think about duty care, lots of these points cross over, whether you're talking about mental well-being, about transition, about education, and actually some of those and the partners and the organisations within that, how can we better collaborate together around a common sense of purpose around supporting people? So I think that's an important message. I'd also, I guess, part of it and a key part of where I understand the conference is trying to get to is talk about some of the solutions, talk about the examples of who's doing it well, what's worked, maybe where some of the challenges have been, and really thinking about that in terms of, I guess, a positive mindset about how we can lay some sort of standards around what good looks like in the future.
Absolutely, and it's going to be jam-packed with all that sort of thing. But the final thing I want to talk to you about, Rob, is that you've just launched the Sporting Chance Prize draw. Tell us about that. Why have you launched it?
Thank you for the opportunity for a shameless charity plug. So the Sporting Chance Prize draw, we're one of 30 charities that are beneficiaries. There are 80 sporting prizes up for grabs. It's basically a giant sporting raffle. So there are prizes for Team GB to go to Paris next year. You can win a skiing holiday, centre court tickets to Wimbledon, tickets to the Women's FA Cup final, 80 prizes, some amazing prizes. You can enter for as little as £10 to win one of those prizes. And what's great about this is 100% of what you donate goes to charity. So if you choose to identify Switch the Play Foundation, 100% of that comes to us as a charity. So it's one of those where you can win, we can win, and ultimately for us, those resources go into how we can support more sports people to help thrive both through their sporting career and beyond.
Amazing. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. Amazing to hear more about Switch the Play Foundation. It's so important to enable those athletes to have a career and a great life after their sporting career ends. So thank you very much for talking on the subject of education today, and we look forward to seeing you in June.
Thanks very much. Likewise.
Right, we are now moving on to our second theme. Time is flying, and this theme is regulation. And you might think it's not the most exciting thing straight away when you hear regulation, hey? But the conversations we've got coming up absolutely are. And now regulation can mean anything from, the regulating of the rules and regulations around governing a sport, or it could talk about the legal aspects or HR. And today, to discuss this topic, I am joined in the studio. Love being in a studio. Firstly, by Joanne Conway, who's Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusiveness at EY UK. So, Joanne.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you finding our studio at
Oh,
Tottenham?
it's fabulous. I'm loving it. Yeah, it's great. Great to be here live. Great to see the stadium.
Yeah, so I started off by saying regulation is maybe not the most sexy topic when it comes to sport. And you work in the professional services industry, but how does that lead to an involvement in the pursuit of equality of sport?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question. So I'm, as you said, Head of Diversity, Equity and Inclusiveness at EY, and I've done that for the last 4 years in the UK firm. And then prior to that, I looked at our global landscape, and then and I've also have a background in finance and psychology. So all of that mix I bring to the work. But then in terms of sports, I grew up with sports. I grew up playing football, not professionally, but just in terms of fun and being able to really have that accessibility for me was really important. So for me, I come from a lower socioeconomic background. There definitely were some sports that I wouldn't have been able to access. But for me, football and just having a football and being able to go out on the street with my friends was free, it was accessible. And I grew up in Dublin when there was the World Cup 1990. So we were taken over by the whole fever of that. So I love sport, and I really see how it brings communities together. And also my son and my daughter both play grassroots football, and I want to make sure that they have equality when it comes to sport, so that they both have that equal accessibility.
And why does representation across sport matter to you?
Yeah, so representation is critical. There are a number of things when we think about representation. We really need to understand what that means. So for us at EY, we have set some targets around representation, but not just about representation. It's really around making sure that when young girls and women in organisations look up, when they make their career choices, when they make the decisions around what sports they want to play, actually representation is a really key driver of that. And we know that particularly when we look at things like sports, that there's been a recent report that was by Women in Football, and they saw that actually girls that were in primary school and were transitioning into high school, 1 million girls who had identified as being really sporty actually started to disengage from sport.
1 million?
1 million, like that's unbelievable.
That's huge.
Yeah, and as somebody that is a mum for 2 and 11-year-old daughter who is completely obsessed with football.
Yeah.
It's a really big part of her identity. I really want her to be able to continue that.
Yeah.
So I think that
there's always that spot, isn't there, around early teens and things that but girls don't carry on playing.
Yeah. So that's a really big piece of it. And actually the positive things around representation is we know that we take the recent Euros, and the women representation from that's been phenomenal, and the uptake on that. And I was looking at some of the statistics around that, and actually, since the Euros, there's been a 200% uptake of girls and women looking to join football.
Yeah.
So like 200%, that's, so you think about how can we start to counterbalance some of that. It really is about making sure that there is representation in sport, and there's representation in business as well for women.
talking about that huge uptake, after the Euros, it really comes back to that thing. If you can't see it, you can't be it, right? And how important that visibility is. I want to take you to numbers and figures, okay? When we talk about regulation, often quotas and targets are thrown out there, and this could be about the target number of females you should have in your organisation, or ethnic targets and things. Can you talk to me a bit about that? Do we need targets and quotas? Do they accelerate the progress?
Yeah, it's a good question, and targets. You mentioned quotas. I think that they get they get talked about in the same sentence, and actually they mean very different things. So to me, targets are really important. They focus the minds. There is no silver bullet for change, but we do know that having senior leadership really buy in and commitment and having targets is one of the key drivers for accelerating change. But we don't mean quotas, because when we talk about quotas, we talk about just ticking a box and putting people in roles who maybe aren't ready for the roles because we want to meet that quota. And that's never the right thing to do. When you talk about targets, you talk about having clear strategic plans, you have a pipeline, you turn your numbers into names, you understand who your women are, and you make sure that you're creating the right environment for them to be successful. And actually, when you create equality for women, you create equality for all. There's a piece of research by Accenture that really talks to that men thrive when you create equality for women, so it's a win-win situation.
That's fascinating. So would you say, not putting words in your mouth at all, I would like your opinion on this, but with targets around equality and diversity and inclusion and everything, that positive changes come for kind of all in the workplace? Yeah. But quotas can be quite negative.
Yeah, I think quotas can create that kind of toxic conversations around, oh, this person has only got this job because there's a quota, and that's not helpful for the people who haven't got the job, but it's also not helpful for the people that have got the job.
No.
Actually, there's been some times where you see, appointments, really senior appointments of CEOs where women have taken those roles and then they haven't been successful, and people talk about, well, they haven't been successful, but what have you done to make sure that you're changing the infrastructure and the environment? We know that our organisations are set up to be historically set up in a way to benefit groups, who are the majority. And one of the things you have to do around that representation and around targets is not just focus on targets, but look at behavioural change and really look at the systemic processes. So throughout your entire employee life cycle, your attraction, your retention, your progression, what's that experience like? And are there some barriers in place that impact some communities over others? And if that's the case, then you need to notice that and you need to remove those blockers to create that equity in the workplace.
Definitely. And just another question on quotas. I'm quite obsessed by this topic. I think it's really interesting. It's like, we've spoken about quotas of the people who get the jobs, right? What about the people who are interviewing?
Yeah.
The interview panel. Should there be a target or quota on who's doing it?
Well, I think we should not have quotas. So I think we should.
Quotas are
gone. I think we don't. I think we agree on that. But I do think that it comes back to that representation. Who's making the decisions, and who's visible, and who's asking the questions. Who is there? We have a structure and a framework that we use around, it's called preference, tradition, requirement. So when we look at things like recruitment or making decisions, are you making that decision based on your personal preference, which will be influenced by your bias and your own, life experience? Is it traditional? Because traditionally there has been this type of person in this role.
Always done the role, they've done a good job.
It has to be in this location, Or is it the requirement? What is the requirement of the role? What is the skill? What is the experience? And focus on that. And when you do that, that's where you start to remove some of that bias. So preference, tradition, requirement is a really good one to think about around that. But I do want to point out around the representation and the progress is that the World Economic Forum have predicted that now it's going to be 136 years till we reach gender parity globally. So obviously there's different pockets in different locations, but 136 years. And actually, we've been set back a whole generation because of the pandemic.
Wow.
So there is lots of progress, but we have got to keep.
Yeah.
This is why we need to have these conversations, because if we don't keep it on the agenda, then you know, what's not measured gets missed.
I mean, that's remarkable. But the fact is that we are obviously seeing progress.
Yeah.
But 136 years is still a long way to go. But we do have to keep pushing, and it can be a bit of a slog, but we have to keep the conversation going. But anyway, going back to your point on bias, you're currently doing a doctorate on the topic of privilege, right?
Yes.
And so can you tell us a bit about your findings on that so far?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm absolutely, you know, fascinated by the topic of privilege, and I'll share some more when I at the conference in June. I'll have some more time to share specific findings or more detailed findings. But I've just completed a systematic literature review, which means I've looked at 10,000 papers across this topic and looked at the summaries of them and identified 70 papers that are really critical to my research topic. So to give a little bit of an example, you know, privilege can often be one of those topics that people feel uncomfortable talking about. There can sometimes be a defensiveness around talking about it, which is why I want to bring the conversation. And privilege, you know, can be invisible often to those of us that have it. And when you have that invisibility, that can create advantages, which, whether we like it or not, can create inequities. So understanding privilege and recognizing that it is a social construct. So we all lack privilege. We all have privilege.
Yeah.
That's a fact. So depending on the situation that we're in, depending on our life experience. But I think sometimes when we talk about privilege, there's a misconception that if I talk about privilege and I recognize where I have privilege, that you're saying I haven't worked hard, and you're not recognizing perhaps the struggles that I've had in my life. And that's simply not true. From my perspective, I've lacked privilege through my social economic background, but I also have huge amounts of privilege by the fact that I'm white, by the fact that I have a senior role in a professional services firm, and it's not one or the other. I am all of those things.
Yeah.
And you know, there's research that that I've been reading that talks about the fact that where people are able to personally self-reflect and acknowledge their own privilege, they're actually more likely to support equality. So that's why I'm really interested in it, because I really believe that when people can have that journey, that we can really create change, you know, and be positive allies and really step up and make a difference. So I think it's a really important conversation to have, but I'll share more.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Joanne. I can't wait for us to talk more at the conference in June and delve into this in much more detail. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. So we are actually going to continue with this topic of regulation. And next, I am delighted to have Rowena Sinhe. Sinhe? Not bad. Almost. But I'll get it soon. Apologies. But Rowena is a partner at Level Law. Thank you so much for coming in today in our studio.
It's a beautiful studio.
It is, isn't it? Can't say we're here often. But anyway, I want to dive in and actually ask that one of the most pertinent discussion points at the moment surrounds the differences between equality and equity. Can you explain what that means and expound on what it means for you?
So I think equality is quite a black and white concept. I think it's purely treating people the same and regardless of circumstance and situation. Equity, I think, is a little bit more nuanced. It actually takes into consideration differences that may be applicable. And a good example would be sort of saying equality would just require equal investment in, for example, men's and women's sports. Whereas equity could suggest that actually we need more investment in women's sport to address the challenges that we've faced over time, and the fact that women's sport has been disadvantaged and there is already pre-existing inequity. So actually maybe you need to invest more in it. So there are pros and cons of both.
Yeah.
But I think one sort of looks at particular circumstances more specifically than the other.
Do you think we're progressing like more in one than the other at all, or do you think they're super interlinked?
For me, I think they're super interlinked. I think if you look at sort of the media view on things, I think it can be a bit skewed. I think it's everyone's sort of very focused on more on equality.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in some cases, yes, there need to be differences. And actually over time that will make a big difference. But yeah, I think we are very focused on equality, whereas I think equity is the right discussion.
And let's move on to finances, okay? Yeah. Super tangible example of when it comes to equality in pay across men and women. And within sport, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 2030 that we're looking at the gender pay gap to be closed or closer than it is, let's say. How quickly do you think that progress can and will be made in pursuit of equal pay in women's sport?
So it's actually the SDP Gender Index, which is the UN's cross-industry target, basically. So
not just sport.
No, so not sport. So the target was equal pay by 2030, and a report came out last year, actually, on International Women's Day, showing that we're completely off course. And it's quite... Actually, if you look at where countries, I think Luxembourg is sort of the highest, but actually a lot of countries where you think we're doing well actually are really, really far behind.
Really?
I think sports can be a great vehicle to publicly showcase this. And I think the discussions that we're having around where women's sports sits in the ecosystem are really relevant, and as well, by the way, in leadership as well, because I think that the same applies across the boat. But I mean, I think a really important consideration is sort of looking at what justifies the means that justifies the outcome. So, you wouldn't say that a banker should earn the same as a postman because they come from different industries, and I think you have to look at commercial value and really focus on that. And the fact of the matter is, at the moment, due to past inequity, the commercial value across the majority of sports for men's sport is higher than that of women. And therefore there's a natural, it's a logical outcome that men are paid more.
There's a lot more sponsorship money, as obviously in the men's football game, for example. Media rights, broadcast fees, everything to do with that and how much that's paid and how many eyes watch it, obviously results in more money, doesn't it? And the women's, although it's growing, it's obviously nowhere near that. So we can't actually at the moment be expected to pay female footballers the same as male footballers until all of those other levels go up.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of studies that show the opportunity is greater in women's sport. So at the moment there is this difference, but over time I think what we'll see is that the curve will be steeper for women. So I think it justifies that benchmarking salaries across sports justifies the difference at the moment. But I think over time we'll see a faster growth of pace. But I think also it's really important to notice that there are actually some sports where we're already I'm from an athletics background, and I spent a lot of my career working in athletics. And there is gender equality across the sport there. So we've sort of had this situation where actually men and women are paid the same.
I mean, tennis is another example.
Tennis now, it's exactly. So I think there is possibly still a difference from a commercial standpoint. So I think there are the Serena Williams of the world who are outliers, but for the majority of female players, maybe there is still a difference between men and women. But again, that goes to sort of eyeballs, viewership. What are we as consumers focusing on, and that's still slightly skewed in the majority of sports towards men.
Can I ask you, before we move on slightly, what is the regulation around it? Other than the reports coming out, how are we monitoring this, and how can we see it improving?
I think it's a really difficult one. I mean, it's there's a number of different. The Equality Act is the main source of regulation, I guess, in this particular area, and I think. Up until now, I guess, it's been very contractual, very, quite simply put. But I think in the past, athletes were treated more as assets rather than, we're starting to humanise them more. But, sport was originally a pastime, a leisure activity, and now it's a multi-million-dollar business. And we're playing catch-up in a lot of areas. Governance is one big one. I know you were just talking to Joanne about representation. We're still really behind the curve on a lot of these things, and one of those things is actually how we treat athletes. And so a lot of the athlete contract has evolved, in that what used to be an endorsement agreement is now an employment contract for a lot of them, especially with the manufacturers. But perhaps they don't have the same protections that you and I would have under an employment contract because they're viewed differently.
Yeah.
So we're seeing this catch up, but it's I think it's been slow to happen because it hasn't been so black and white as to how we treat these athletes.
And speaking of athletes and female athletes in particular, something that we actually mentioned briefly earlier, but is about having children whilst being an athlete. And why has it taken so long for basic rights such as maternity leave to be recognised within the sports industry?
I mean, you talked about this before. I think, as it's sort of, when I was an athlete, people didn't have babies. When you had a baby, you were retired.
Yeah.
That was it. I think there's a tech angle to that, and advancements in sort of training techniques and things like that. But it was sort of like you had a child when you'd finished your career. I think now with all the advancements, actually, we see so many athletes who go away and have babies and come back. So I think there was that element that it just wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
But I think it was also that, I think it just wasn't thought about. And, we are still...
It wasn't prioritised?
Wasn't prioritised, and I mentioned leadership because I think, there is that element of why we need diverse leadership to be able to think of things differently. And, if you are largely governed by men, perhaps maternity doesn't come into the conversation.
It's not top of mind quite as much, yeah.
So whereas I think now that is changing, but it's a brilliant example is the fact that, it's only recently that we've realised how hormonal changes affect training, performance, all of these sorts of things, which, that's so recent. So, to talk about even contemplating having a child and coming back after that to high-level sport is so new. But again, it's also a change in perception, I think.
Definitely. Moving in the right direction, but there's a lot around it that needs to change with it as well, isn't there?
And our attitudes to it as well.
Exactly. And we need to stop being so shocked by it. Like, having a baby,
or she's so old, how's she still competing?
She's coming back. So all these things, break down these barriers, and the more we talk about it and the more we normalise it, the more, the more we can get for it and everything else. I'm going to end on maybe a slightly controversial question. Does better regulation for women in sport versus men equate to less equality?
I just think it goes against the concept of equality. If you're saying you're going to treat, and it's a little bit again like your quota discussion before. It's if you favour one group, then that's not equality. It goes right back to the start. For me, I think it is really around looking at circumstances, because it isn't just women and men. I think there's different groups of people across the board in terms of diversity. So I think there are specific areas which we need to focus on. But even if you take, for example, safeguarding, there's and going back to the point of perception and our own views on things, our own biases, perhaps we think women are more at risk of safeguarding issues, where actually it's just, there are risks for men as well. So I think we've got to be really cautious in how we approach it and say it's not necessarily a male and female divide.
Yeah.
Same with maternity. Actually, we need to also think about paternity.
Definitely.
So I think equality is a bit misleading in this area. I think it's more addressing issues that should be the focus.
Well, thank you so much. I think we could have spoken all day about this, Rowena, but hopefully we can pick up the conversation at a later date. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll stick around maybe for the Q&A later. And yeah, that kind of concludes our regulation strand. So we have had 4 amazing guests so far. And the next theme that we are going to be jumping into is gamification. Now, gamification and tech, I am super intrigued to have these conversations. It's such a hot topic for everyone at the moment. The need to engage audiences in sport. I mean, we've got the rise of AI, we have got TikTok, and love it or hate it, we have got the likes of ChatGPT. It's becoming more and more part of our everyday lives, and who knows, robots and games might soon rule the world. But anyway, I'm excited to be talking to 2 wonderful women today. And the first one is with me in the studio. We've got Anju Solanki, who's founder and CEO of MEA Consulting Group. And talking about a hot topic, you've got a great suit on. So
I love the block colours.
Definitely. Block colours all the way to go. But Anju, thank you for joining us here today, for being part of Everything in Sport, this women's edition. Gamification, what a topic. I've heard you talk about tech for good. Tech intimidates a lot of people, but can you explain to us what you mean by tech for good?
Great question. And absolutely, when we think about tech, we can quite often think about how it's been used, I guess, outside of the intention of what it's been created for. So tech for good is really around using the innovation in technologies to progress human nature, to progress us as humans, and doing that by creating more positive societal impacts and facilitating social change. And so by that, if we look at the UN, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, just pulling out a couple of those, you've got moving towards good health and well-being, gender equality, reducing inequalities. So it's really around how we can use our new devices, applications, technology to help facilitate that. And the reason it's so important is because when we talk, and we've had so many people talk about inequality, and we're talking about equity, we've got structural inequalities. So you've got the policies, you've got law, regulation, which are, defined by our political systems, our governments. But then you've got effectively a belief system. So us as people, we have our own perspectives, our own biases, and we have our own ways of thinking that affects the way we act as people. And to shift that behaviour isn't easy.
Definitely. And I mean, tech definitely can be used for good. I'm a big supporter of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and know that basically we do have to innovate, don't we, to move forward and to do things for good. But I want to ask you, do you use virtual realities?
I do, yes.
Yeah?
So I run MIA Consulting Group, which is
Tell me about that.
It's a diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy. So we were created to help build more inclusive workplaces and organisations. And as someone who trains in that space and educates, one of the biggest challenges is actually trying to help people understand the lived experiences of other people. So you can put two people in the same room together and they can have a completely different experience of the same thing. So
in what way? In what way are they having this different experience?
So the best way to describe this is as the elephant and mouse syndrome. So if anyone's read a book called The Loudest Duck, it's around powers and power struggles. So if you were to put an elephant in the same room as a mouse, the elephant doesn't need to know much about the mouse if it's to survive.
Right.
But the mouse, on the other hand, needs to know everything about the elephant if it's to survive. And anecdotally, that plays true for dominant and non-dominant groups, because dominant groups have more power, and non-dominant groups have had to really adjust themselves to thrive and survive in certain environments. But what that means is you could experience being in exactly the same room, but how can the elephant understand what it's like to be the mouse? How can the mouse understand what it's like to be the elephant? And that's one of the biggest asks of humans. We're asking them to build empathy and increase their emotional intelligence, to say, as we talked about some of these issues, if you have just recently had a baby and you've gone through childbirth, how can you possibly understand what that's like? And how can you build that curiosity and empathy to understand that so you can support that change? So the answer to your question is yes, I use virtual realities.
I love the context.
And I use virtual realities to help promote behavioural change. Because we found that talking about diversity, inclusion, equity is great in changing attitudes, but not that behaviour. And virtual reality, for anyone who might not know what virtual reality is wearing this very cool Oculus headset, and you basically are tricking your brain into thinking you're somewhere you're not.
It's basically a very high-tech blindfold, and you're seeing a different world around you, aren't you? You could be on a beach somewhere, or you could be in a different office, right?
You can be. I was skiing the other day, just in the headset. So you place yourself in a different environment. So for the last year, I partnered up with a virtual reality tech company, neuroscientists, virtual reality scientists, and academia specialists to see how we can create behavioural change using a concept called, and you'll rein me in if I'm over talking, it is virtual embodiment. So what that is how can you, Jess, experience what it's like to be me and you.
Oh
so
my goodness.
You'll go into what we call an experience.
Yeah.
It could be in a workplace environment,
Yeah.
and you start off in your own, what we call avatars. So your avatars are your virtual selves.
So would it make me kind of like the same size that you are? So you'd see things at a different level, or like, you know, you'd be a different environment that I'm not used to, that type of thing?
So depending on what we've created for you at
Yeah.
that point in time, if you were to go in as yourself,
Yeah.
you'll see your hands moving, you'll experience people talking to you with your own I get your own hat on.
Yeah.
So you'll interpret that information the way you would in your daily environment.
Yeah.
If you then get embodied into halfway through a meeting, you get
Yeah.
embodied into myself,
Yeah.
into Andrew.
Yeah.
You notice like your hands look different,
Yeah.
your skin colour is different,
Yeah.
and you might hear yourself speak. But what we've done through this, and it relates to what Joanne was talking about around privilege and microaggressions and allyship. So it's like, how can we, in what we're talking about, is how can we increase representation? How can we understand the invisible barriers that are out there? And how can we understand that things are different for different people? So we, over the last year, have been creating a scene where you are embodied as yourself. You go into work, you have your manager, you have your colleague Rupert, who's come off the graduate scheme, loves skiing, loves life. And then your wonderful colleague Tola, who is of the same level as Rupert, but been working for a few more years.
Yeah.
And you just see a whole real life scene play through.
Yeah.
And what you get from that being embodied into Tola halfway through the meeting, you almost get offended in a way that you wouldn't get offended for some of these microaggressions, like being interrupted or being credited for being articulate rather than your technical ability or other things. And what we found through the use of virtual reality and the data we can collate from that is that there is a cognitive effect, there's a physiological effect, and there's a behavioural change that comes from having that embodiment for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And then what we've done with that experience is gamified the learning. It's really hard to teach people how to be diverse, inclusive, equitable.
Yeah.
And it's quite difficult to engage people who want to learn, but actually it's difficult to get that interaction and engagement. So we thought about ways that we can gamify learning to increase that engagement, increase that enjoyment around it. And it's just so funny because us as humans, we love to punch things or shoot at things or move our bodies and do things. So we ask questions in a gamified way, and we found that actually you can train people in a shorter period of time using virtual reality.
And can I ask you, we've spoken a lot about the gamification of virtual reality in the workplace. When we apply this to sport, and I definitely see it if you were in a sports organisation, which generally may be more male-dominated, right? That's how we feel about it in women's sports industry. So you could obviously definitely use it in that case, like how someone would feel in an office being X person and being X person. What about in the wider sports world? How can we use this type of thing?
That's a really interesting question, and it's so applicable. So when we think about representation of sport, I'll give you an example just of my sister used to run for the under 21 for Great Britain, and culturally it was never supported at home. So what you might see on race day, before she's had her race day, at home there's been a conversation around how her exam results are not what they would be, and how it's affecting, it's a cost for her to be involved in sport.
Yeah.
And the point at which people see her as an athlete, she's been through and experienced so much. So it can give you the backdrop and the real life circumstance of what they've been through by placing you in those situations that you wouldn't be aware of. But actually, when it comes to inclusion in sports, we think about disability in sports and physical access.
Fascinating. Okay.
And seeing how it plays through on a day-to-day environment from the dressing room. It could be access to the dressing room. It could be going through or experiencing banter. And if you're embodied into someone that's different to yourself, you will get offended in some ways that you wouldn't as your virtual self. And it's really just being able to share and embrace a lived experience of someone, because all of that impacts performance, it impacts participation, and there are so many ways you can use it for sport.
Yeah. And for good, right?
For good.
Yeah. It can really drive things forward and enable us to have a better sports world, right? For the athlete and for people at home. Like this can go for people coming to stadiums and things as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We could talk all day, Anju, about this. I'm fascinated. I can't wait to come and try one of these out at some point and put myself in a different situation. And you have really kicked off our gamification, and I can't wait to talk to you more about it. And next, we are going to be talking to Billy Purdy from British Esports, and hopefully Billy is going to be coming up on my screen. Yes. Hello, Billy. Can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Hello and welcome to Everything in Sport Women's Edition, the gamification theme. I want to start. Bit of a blunt question, Billy. What does scrimming mean?
So scrimming is a word that I think has actually been adopted from the word scrimmage that's used often in sports. It's essentially a test or like a practice match between two teams. It kind of allows people to have a competitive environment rather than competing in a public match, which you would normally go into with your team. You'd usually have a goal within each scrim as to what you'd like to achieve.
And when we talk about this, we're talking esports, aren't we? So for everyone at home who might not be super familiar with the gaming world, Billy, can you give us a bit of a flavour of esports and what is it like at the moment?
Yeah, esports is just taking the world by storm at the minute, I feel like. I think it's been a massive revolution from having COVID. Everyone was kind of stuck at home. People were getting more into gaming, and because of that, it's become a competitive element that, people can watch online whilst they're at home if they're not particularly wanting to play at it. It's gone into education. There's many esports courses that you can actually go and study now. It's just completely taken the world by storm.
And when did you first realise that it would be possible to have a career in esports? I mean, I can tell you're relatively young, obviously by the way you look, but when did you realise this could be a job? I can do this for a living.
Yeah, so I'm primarily from a sports background, actually. I really enjoyed playing in like basketball and netball when I was younger, played regionally. And then I kind of got roped into studying business management at university. Hated accounting, hated it so much. So kind of left that business side of things and went on to do a sports degree. Finished that whilst working at Starbucks and was looking to go in the sports industry for my career. However, in my personal sort of life, I've always been a gamer. As much as I was a closet gamer when I was younger, never really told anyone that I was into gaming. I actually attended my first LAN event, which for anyone that doesn't know what a LAN event is, it's just when a bunch of gamers get together, bring their own computers and just game for a weekend. So I attended my first one in 2021. A month after that, I worked at my first LAN event. And then I just realized, like, oh my goodness, there's a place here for me. I can combine like my hobbies with something that I want to actually do. And before that, I was a streamer also. I always kind of promoted diversity and inclusion and try and encourage a safe space for people to come and speak to me and speak to others and build that sort of community. I just realized that I could combine my passion with something that I could actually do as a career. And well, here I am today.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit about your role at British Esports? What do you do? What's the day in the life of Billy at British Esports look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the Women in Esports manager at British Esports. So essentially I work in the Women in Esports initiative, which I'll dive into a little bit later. But essentially what we do is focus on being the change in the esports industry. It's very similar to sports in the way that women don't necessarily have the same opportunities as men. It's very heavily male dominated. So we'll look at things like that.
And speaking of it being very male dominated, I mean, sport, as we know, obviously we've got a lot more male, it's very male skewed compared to female, and that's why we're here, we're promoting events like this. But esports in particular, right? I mean, the numbers are huge on the male side compared to the female. Did you feel intimidated to begin with?
Absolutely. Being a woman in gaming can be a scary place at times, but the more that I'm getting into it, the more that I've, started working in the space, I've realized that it can be an issue. Not just like people being in the space, but people not feeling as though they can enter the space, which is something that obviously we try to change within my work.
That's something I was going to ask you, actually. If I wanted to get into gaming, I do see it as quite an intimidating place. Or like, what advice would you give to anyone who actually wants to jump in and get involved, but is feeling a bit like, don't know if it's the place for me?
I always think like just go for it in anything that you do. People are intimidated by anything that they've not tried, so just giving it a go is always a good first step to take. There's a bunch of different communities. Online is so accessible to so many different people. There's this application called Discord, which is frequently used amongst gamers, where you can just jump on a headset, jump on a mic, and just speak to like-minded individuals and just kind of come together to find that safe environment where you can find people who also want to game and are all at different, entry points. So yeah, it's a great way to get involved.
And speaking of the numbers in particular, like, tell us a bit about the current numbers of women in gaming, and is it going up?
Yeah, so I feel like esports is still so early in its journey, it's such an early industry. I kind of have a few different perspectives on this. I feel like there's the player community perspective, there's the workplace perspective, and then there's the product perspective. So from my experience, esports and gaming has always been heavily male dominated. But I feel as though you can't actually gauge how many women are in the space, because we're all kind of hiding our identity in a way online just simply by not using our microphone to communicate. So that's kind of your player community perspective. As for your workplace, Forbes actually did a study in 2020 that found that the top 14 global gaming companies revealed that 84% of their executive positions in the gaming industry were men. So it kind of poses that sort of question of, is my gender limiting my career progression? And until that representation comes through, I feel like that could continue. And lastly, onto the sort of product perspective and kind of discussing representation, we could easily dive into the world of female characters in gaming. So for me, I feel as though there's a lack of female protagonists in gaming at the moment. And if I was to ask everyone, who's the first sort of female character that comes to mind? So even if I was to ask you, if you think of gaming, who's the first female character you think of?
Oh, Billy, I'm not the person to ask me. Knowledge is diabolical, so you can't ask me. I'm sorry.
Well, for me personally, it would be Lara Croft. And I mean, when I was younger, I found her so empowering, yet she's still so defined by her sex appeal, despite having a whole franchise built upon her. And so arguably, she's a character created for men. And then to give another example, you have the damsel in distress sort of character, which would be Princess Peach on Mario, who's just reliant upon a man to kind of come and save the day,
Yeah. Can I ask you about that sexualization of like Lara Croft? And I actually did play Tomb Raider when I was younger, so maybe who knows? Is that still the case? Are female characters still quite highly sexualized?
I would say so, yeah. I think it's getting better, but just even in the element of protagonists, a lot of female characters can be like side characters or characters that you don't necessarily get to play as the protagonist. So even just not hypersexualizing women is going to completely help us enter this space.
Yeah, and is that improving? Or how is your work helping generally with the women versus men split in gaming?
Yeah, so we do a variety of work across a variety of different areas, and we have sort of key pillars that kind of drive our initiative forward. So our education pillar is essentially having conversations with others to just kind of promote the understanding of equality in esports and other creative industries. We will speak at events, seminars, just kind of promote and educate that equality in esports. And then not just that, like the benefits of STEM related careers also. And just kind of nipping it in the bud from a young age that, toxicity is not tolerated in esports, and esports is for everyone, regardless of your gender. One of the amazing examples that we've had is the Student Champs. So the Student Champs is a competitive video game tournament that British esports run for schools and colleges and for individuals that are 12 plus. Women in esports actually introduced a pilot for that, which required 3 out of the 5 participants in each team to identify as female or marginalised gender, just to encourage more younger girls to start getting involved. 70% of our participants had never participated in the Student Champs before, and 2 teams actually went to go on into the main champs after competing in our pilot. So making great progress in the educating sector. We also focus on engaging. So community is a large part of what we do. We kind of help stimulate an early interest in esports careers and then other related fields for other marginalised genders also. We also do a variety of events, programs, community engagement activations. We were recently at Insomnia Gaming Festival, which for anyone that doesn't know, it's another huge LAN event that people will attend. There's gaming exhibitions. There's a bunch of different activities that are going on. We had a show match on the esports stage at that event, where we invited a bunch of women to come and compete on stage in a show match of Valorant, which is a competitive first-person shooter. And it just allowed females to come up on that stage, show that we are here, we're visible, we're going to be loud and proud in the scene, and just showcase that women are here.
And you mentioned Insomnia there, and you mentioned esports and having some players go up on stage, and female players going and playing Valorant? How do I say it?
Valorant.
You're a Valorant player, aren't you? Why that game in particular?
I just feel like Valorant has such a huge welcoming community to women. For a starter, they have a bunch of female characters in their game, so it's already great to just latch onto that. And the publishers Riot actually have a women's only circuit within their VCT, which stands for Valorant Champions Tour, called Game Changers, which encourages professional development and allows a safe space for us women to compete. It's one of the only sort of first-person shooter games that I've actually felt like I can progress in as a player.
That is extremely interesting to hear. Billy, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for your time. But one last question before you go. I know you said that people should just get involved, but if someone just wants to, what's the entry level? What website do we go to? What's the sitch?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I know gamers are notorious for using Reddit, for example, but I know I mentioned Discord. There's so many different Discord communities out there that you can just hop on your computer, hop into a Discord community and speak there. Twitter, social media, it's everywhere because it's online, right? Twitch, another great place to make friends and just engage with others who are interested in gaming.
Well, thank you so much, and look forward to catching more on this, because that has been fascinating, and maybe I'll go and get the Nintendo out. Who knows? Who knows? Thank you, Billy. Right, next, we're already on to our fourth theme, and this is the theme of stimulation. There's many ways that this could be applied in the sports world, and I'm delighted to be talking to two wonderful women about this. First up, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Emma Ross on the topic of stimulation. She is CEO and co-founder of the Well HQ. So, Emma, are you there? Oh, you are. Hi, Emma.
I am. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Enjoying all of these very stimulating talks.
Yeah, well, speaking of stimulation then, Emma, well, I'm actually going to jump straight on and ask you about the Well HQ. I mean, I'm familiar with it, but for those who don't necessarily know about it, please, can you just give us a bit of a summary?
I would love to. So in my previous life, I was the head of physiology at the English Institute of Sport, which is the science and medicine arm of the Olympic and Paralympic system. So I was involved in supporting elite athletes. And in my work there, I very much focused on trying to understand the female athlete and make sure we were supporting our female athletes well enough. And just before the Tokyo Olympics, I stepped out of that role because I saw the need to spread awareness, education, research, innovation around the female athlete and female athlete health more broadly than the space I was working in. So I co-founded the Well with two other amazing women's health specialists. One's a GP, one's a pelvic floor specialist, former GB rower as well. And that's kind of our mission now, is to really help the whole of sport, whether it's exercise, fitness or sport, from participation to performance, understand female bodies so that the female body isn't the thing holding women back in sport.
Absolutely. And I mean, we could talk all day. As you know, I'm from a netball background, and so women in particular in sport, and obviously in netball, it being so female dominated, it's so intense. And pelvic floor, I mean, we could talk about that all day. But anyway, I would like to ask, what's new and emerging in the world of female athlete health at the moment?
So I'll start with what's not, but what we still haven't got right. So periods and sports bras. Luckily, fortunately, our conversations around them have been increasing, but we still haven't got that right. So, saw Dina Asher-Smith talking about period symptoms getting in the way of her Euros last year. Ellie Cardwell, netballer, on Instagram saying there's not enough sports bra provision for larger breasted women. So we haven't got that right, but at least there is lots of conversation about that. What I think is new and emerging that we're really passionate about, one thing is concussion. So again, concussion isn't new. I think our attention to concussion in sport is sort of really renewed because of lots of these athletes who have done sport in their younger years who are now suffering from neurodegeneration and early diagnosis of things like dementia. So there's been a renewed interest in concussion. But what we're really interested in is that females are twice as likely to suffer a concussion. Their symptoms are often worse. Their return to play is often slower. And we do not yet have enough data from women in sport around concussion to fully understand it. So all of the guidelines we have prepared at the moment, whatever sport you play, will be based on data from men. And fundamentally, our bodies are different. You know, one of the things that plays into concussion is that women have lighter heads and weaker necks. And so we just cannot withstand some of the forces that are put through our head when we're playing sport, as well as men can. When we fall, we're less able to hold our head from the ground, so it smacks the ground more. Even in a beautifully non-contact sport like yours, netball, hint, nudge, nudge, the wink, wink, no, it's not. You know, falling onto a hard floor is enough, yes, enough to injure the brain. And in women, we know that there's a higher prevalence of concussion, and we need to get better at designing rehabilitation from concussion that's gender specific. But also in that field, there's something called subconcussion, which is where you don't get knocked out, you don't get concussive symptoms, but the forces that are acting on your body, if you've bumped into someone, if you've fallen over, if you've collided with a goalpost, they go through your brain and they cause a small amount of damage. But over time in sport, that damage adds up, and they think that's what's contributing to a lot of the brain damage that we're seeing in ex-athletes. And so again, because we know that females are at greater risk of concussion, it goes to, you know, hypothesize that they're probably at greater risk of subconcussion. They're also at greater risk of neurodegeneration as a whole. So we're really interested in brain health in female athletes to make sure that we're doing everything we can now when we're starting to get this data, so we don't look back and say, oh, flippin' heck, why didn't we act sooner? So concussion and subconcussions for us is really interesting. And the second thing I think is emerging that's really exciting me is technology that will allow us to better understand female health. So for example, we're working with a hormone monitoring tech company who have developed a point of care. So that means you can test wherever you are, pitch side, in the gym, at home, a point of care test for our menstrual cycle hormones. And this is amazing because at the moment you'd have to go and get a blood test for those hormones. And because of that, you would only maybe go once or twice to get those levels measured. If you're measuring it in saliva, if you wanted to, you could measure it every day. And suddenly you then have such a better picture of the health of that individual, in particularly athletes, because we know that menstrual health is really key to athlete health. It's almost a cornerstone of your health as a female athlete. So now we have the technology to do a lot better. And therefore we can integrate that information into things like bigger data analytics platforms. So, you know, you have all these big data in sport now, which is looking at training load and recovery and how much high speed running you did on the pitch and all of this data. And now imagine if you could integrate stuff that was happening specific to the physiology of a female into that, so you could start to see whether there were relationships between those things. So I think those are two really exciting areas in female athlete health.
Hugely exciting, Emma. And can I just ask you, so talking about the, you know, hormones, we all know that we feel differently at one time of the month than another, right? And obviously that has a huge impact on your athletic performance, right? So are you saying that until like now, until very, very recently, to be able to measure like how your hormones were impacting your performance, you had to do a blood test?
Yes, in short, yes. Which is, and now we can do it in saliva, which is amazing. And we've only, this technology, it's so hard to, you know, biosciences is very technical, and it's really hard to accurately and reliably measure some of these biomarkers in saliva. I mean, they're sort of most readily available in your blood. That's why it's a sort of easy sample. But the technology is coming on, and the brilliant people that work in the science of this space have allowed us to measure these hormones in saliva. And you can also measure things like cortisol and testosterone, which again are interesting for everyone in sport, but interesting for women in sport as well. And that does make it so much more accessible, like you say, to be able to get a better understanding, better than we ever have done before.
And I mean, I could talk about this section all day, but so obviously it will be able to tell you when you potentially be able to perform better and just so many facets. But, you know, do you think that in previous times people may have been continuously on the pill, do you know what I mean, to prevent getting their period, for example, whilst performing, and this could prevent that? This basically just makes people understand women's bodies more and how they can perform and when they should perform and when they shouldn't. Can I ask you, I'm going on a tangent a bit, but if someone is on there, is menstruating, are they less likely to perform well, and should they not do that competition, or what should happen?
So the brilliant news is that the research, and we have got enough research now to be fairly sure that on any given day of our menstrual cycle, and you're right, the hormones are going up and down across the menstrual cycle. They are changing our physiology, week by week, day by day. But at no point in the menstrual cycle do those hormones lower your physiological capacity to do something. So if you did a speed test, for example, a power test, a aerobic fitness test, a strength test, you should be able to PB on any day of your cycle. Now, if you're a woman who's experienced a menstrual cycle, then that doesn't sound right, because actually what's impacting our ability to perform is our symptoms. So we know that the hormones don't just affect muscles and our ability to produce strength, but they affect our metabolism, our energy, our motivation to move. They might create pain, tiredness, and it's those things. It's no good saying I have a VO2 max of 60, but if you've got lethargy, bloating, and a migraine, there's no way you're going to be able to deliver that. So understanding the menstrual cycle more will allow us to understand, okay, why do people get symptoms? By the way, we don't really know much about that. And then what can we do about them so that on any day they can show up and deliver the best performance that they're able to?
Absolutely, that's absolutely fascinating, Emma. Can I ask you, does the quality of training for everyone working in women's sport generally need to improve? And should it be mandatory?
Yeah, I mean, we come across coaches and PE teachers and sports scientists who they're really well intended in terms of they're working in women's sport, and they say, I don't know anything about the menstrual cycle physiology. I don't know why it's important to have breast support. I don't know about pelvic floor health. I don't know how nutrition differs in a female body. And I've done all these years of training or qualifications. So yes, we need, whether it's in coaching qualifications, in sports science degrees, in medical degrees, in PE teaching qualifications, I think we need to be better at not just having like an hour on this special population that are women, but integrating understanding about women's bodies throughout every single part of that education, because we are half of the population, and it's likely that these people will have a female in front of them at some point. So yeah, we need to get much better at educating everyone about female bodies.
100%. Well, and we are more than 50% of the population, aren't we? So
exactly.
I agree. We could talk all day, Emma, but we're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Emma Ross, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in June as well at the conference here in Tottenham.
Thank you.
Right. We are moving on. We're staying on with the same topic of stimulation, but I am now joined in the studio, won't get tired of saying that, by Lindsay Douglas, Head of Client Strategy UK, Whole Client Strategy at UK and Ireland of Nielsen Sports. Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
No problem. We're delighted to have you. First of all, could you just give a little background on Nielsen Sports, please, and your role there?
Yeah, sure. So Nielsen Sports, we work in the commercial side of sport. We have lots of data, so I'm going to try and explain some nice data points to you as we go through this. But the main things we do are kind of look at audiences, fan behaviour, who are the fans, what's changing, and really try to make sense of things to help our clients who might be football clubs, F1 teams, brands, help them understand what they should be doing. Is it the right thing? What's the strategy? Big focus on sponsorship within that as well. So a lot of data and try and make sense of it.
And a lot of numbers. And speaking of data and numbers, sponsorship, right? Can you give us a bit of a brief overview of the size and growth of the global sponsorship industry, within sport particularly?
Yeah, sure. So we track sponsorship deals globally, so we know what's happening, what's everybody spending. That's what we're looking at. So globally, really positive. So we've seen a recovery from COVID,
great,
which is great to see. So the amount of revenue going into sponsorship last year was 48 billion. Huge amount. Mm-hmm. That's actually slightly higher than 2019, so we're kind of back on that growth trajectory. So it's growing, it's really healthy. I think within that though, what we're seeing is some of the biggest deals are getting bigger, but the ones under that top tier it's competitive, it's hard for everyone to get sponsorship dollars and get it in. And I guess that's where women's sport is, kind of not necessarily the top 50, 100 million deals, but there may be tens of millions deals in that middle. But I think in terms of women's sport, and we'll come on to speak more about it, but I think there is really big brands getting involved in women's sport, which is really positive to see.
Well, we're speaking of, of women's sponsorship deals. Are they growing? They are growing, but is it quite saturated?
They are growing, yes. So going back to the global picture, it's kind of growing slowly, about 3%.
Okay, 3% year on year?
Yeah, that's global all deals. So women's sport is actually different to that trend. It's growing quickly, it's thriving,
okay.
I like to say. So what we're seeing, I guess there's a few different aspects to it in women's sport. One thing is we're seeing new rights, there's new sponsorships available that weren't before. So we've seen the likes of FIFA, UEFA, World Rugby, separate out their women's sponsorship rights.
Yes.
So it's a new area that a brand can come in and sponsor. So I guess in that sense, it's going from zero, because those rights didn't exist, to tens of millions, like really big deals.
Yeah.
So I think that's one positive aspect, is kind of a real sense of this is worth something. I'm going to go out and get brands to sponsor.
Just speaking about that separation point, I think it's really interesting, because previously, right, if you maybe sponsored a football club, a Premier League football club, male football club, you would often get the female club chucked in as well, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, there you go. Yeah. Whereas now it's like, ooh, there's value in this, so they've separated out.
Yeah. And there's a lot that goes into that. I think it's kind of a cycle, and there's no one right way or wrong way. So I think firstly, it's investing in the products, investing in the athletes so that they can be the best, bringing them on to the kind of within the same clubs or the same unions, governing bodies, whatever that is, giving them a platform. And then it's going, well, what is women's sport? Is it different? Am I offering something unique, different to men's sport? There's maybe different fan base, different target markets, different associations.
And we are, aren't we? We are offering something different.
Absolutely, yeah.
It doesn't mean it's an entirely different audience, but it brings other things to the table.
Definitely, yeah. And if you go to football, if you go to a men's match or women's match, it's different. It's different people there, different atmosphere. So there's all that to kind of untangle and figure out what's an offer and what's a unique proposition for brands to be involved in.
And we obviously, like as you say, it's definitely growing, and in particular football, right? The Women's Super League and the Lionesses off the back of the Euros, absolutely huge. But for other sports, like quite substantially smaller female sports, like women's rugby and netball, are those sponsors coming through, or is it a lot of lip service?
I think they are. I think women's football is leading the way. They're getting the biggest deals, the biggest audiences, biggest media rights. But there is a lot of change, there's a lot of progress. I think one highlight for me, I used to play rugby, so that is my favourite sport. But it's TikTok coming into the Women's Six Nations, which has been brilliant. So it's a different brand. You wouldn't expect TikTok to come into rugby. Yeah. But they've taken that on board and they've integrated loads of different things where a lot of the rugby players are doing a lot on TikTok, they're sort of becoming influencers. So it's just a really different feel and aspect to it. So we are seeing, I guess, rugby, cricket, netball, they are increasing as well. And one interesting aspect I was looking at as well is the WTA, so tennis. Yeah. So they have increased their sponsorship revenue by 3 times. So that's a sport where I guess we think there's maybe not a lot of change. Like tennis has always been big for females, but that's increasing as well. So
fascinating. Yeah. And the data that you obviously have, a lot of data, like where can we find it? Where does it go? What reports does it end up in?
So we do a few things where we maybe put together a report. We might do something around the Women's Football World Cup, things like that. So always keep an eye out. But we do a lot kind of with clients themselves in really bespoke areas. One example we've done recently is with the FA. So they really want to drive, I guess on the back of the Euros, they want to drive attendances, viewership, engagement on social around the WSL. Yeah. So we did a piece of work to understand different fan groups, kind of who are the current fans, what's the drivers, who are the potential fans, how can clubs capture those fans, bring them into the stadiums, get them watching regularly. So it's those kind of areas that we're helping clients sort of directly to maximise things and improve things in women's sport.
And speaking of the women versus men's sponsorship, what actual proportion does women's sponsorship have? within this?
So I'd say it's hard to say one number,
Yeah.
one proportion of it. It is still small. Like, to be honest, hasn't got the kind of huge depth that men's sport does in terms of, especially kind of football, US sports, and so on.
Are we talking under 5%?
I wouldn't know, to be honest. But I think it is small, but it's growing. One of the intricacies that is hard to figure out is that you might have, I think England Rugby are a good example of this, you might have O2 who sponsor England Rugby. That's men's and women's, so you can't kind of separate that out and tease it out. And
it's not always black and white.
Yeah, it's not always separate, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
Brands are coming in, they're wanting to sponsor men's and women's together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say it probably is still a relatively small proportion, but personally, since working in this area, I used to look at it and there's maybe some tennis players up there. Now there's loads of deals. As we said, there's a lot of big brands involved. There's a lot of kind of 1 million to 10 million to 20 million deals. So it's definitely growing, and it's on everybody's radar as a massive strategic focus going forward as well.
Well, it's good to know, and as we've kind of been saying today, like, there's a lot of progress that's happened, but we do have to keep pushing to ensure that women's sport keeps growing, because everyone is behind it, you know. It's not just happened miraculously, you know. And, you know, speaking of the impact of the Euros, how does that compare to, you know, football in the UK as compared to other UK domestic sports?
Yeah, it's been a huge impact from Euros. And what's been interesting is not been a spike and then a trough again. It's really sustained. So I looked at TV audience for WSL and
Women's Super League,
Women's Super League, so the average live audience there it's now ahead of the likes of Rugby Union, Rugby League on the men's side.
Really? Hang on, so Women's Football Super League is ahead of Rugby Union men's at the moment, in terms of what, viewership weekly and that type of thing?
So we're looking at average live viewership, so the amount of people tuning in for live matches on average.
Yeah, that's huge.
It's a great broadcast deal, I guess, with Sky, BBC, so there's good audiences there, but I think that's the thing, we often compare women's football to Premier League. Nothing's really comparable to Premier League. No. It's huge. But when you start to compare women's football to other domestic leagues, it really is stacking up now. It's really up there compared to some of the others.
Amazing. And carrying on with the theme of football, what can we expect from like the FIFA Women's World Cup later this year?
I say big things, hopefully. A few things there, a few aspects. It is in Australia, so that is going to affect...
different time zone, right, from us? And are people going to be getting up at 2:30 in the morning, for example? I haven't seen the schedule, but, you know.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what time the games are going to be, but it will affect it. We've done a few things with predictive analysis to look at the impact on time zone, and we might see 10 to 20% lower audiences because of the time zone. But I guess overall, globally, there's countries playing like China, like Brazil, USA, so there's going to be some huge audiences there. And we might see, I'm Scottish, but we might see the Lionesses do well, and I think that will get people on board in this country, and it'll start to gain momentum and big audiences and big engagement as well.
And I mean, we can all feel the Euro fever here in England, right, from the Lionesses win, but is there kind of female football fever all over the world?
There is, yeah. I think it's been very special in the UK because of being hosts and winning. That's quite unique. But it is growing, especially across the European leagues, Spain, France, Italy. It's really growing. There's a lot of huge attendances we're seeing across Europe, especially in the likes of the Champions League. The US is growing as well, so WNBA continues to grow, so the basketball league there. It really is, there's differences, there's different things going on in different markets, but there definitely is a global trend, upwards trend for women's sport.
Well, it's all moving in the right direction, and I eagerly await your results from the Women's Football World Cup later this year, so I look forward to reading those. But thank you so much for coming in, Lindsay, and kind of rounding off our stimulation section, and we hope to carry on this conversation later this year.
Thank you very much.
So we're now moving on to our final theme, which is innovation, and we have got one speaker left before we go to a bit of a Q&A and rounding up. And please don't forget, if you want tickets to the event in June, just head to the Everything in Sport website, and they are currently at an early bird ticket price, so do get them quick. It will be here at Tottenham Stadium. So the final section of innovation, it's our final theme today, and it's something which is integral to sport and women's sport. I mean, to ensure that we stay relevant and we keep engaging new audiences, we need to innovate. And my final guest today is Lauren Hamlin, who is the head of open innovation at Under Armour. And hello, Lauren, you join us from America, am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Good morning, is it? Is that correct?
Yes, good morning. Still morning here.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us and rounding up our wonderful conference today. I don't know what you've heard, but we've had some amazing chats about all sorts of things. And I want to come to you. We are talking about innovation in sport, and your role is head of open innovation at Under Armour, huge global sportswear brand. Can you tell us a bit about kind of what you do in the day-to-day?
Absolutely. So I have been with Under Armour for just about 12 years. It'll be 12 years next week, actually. And I came on as I'm paralegal, so I opened our innovation lab, which I'm actually sitting in right now. And from that, I built it out into more of a business development role. And my current role, I head open innovation, which means I look for new ideas, entrepreneurs, startups, a very broad funnel, and I bring those ideas back to the business to see if there's a fit within one of the business units and hopefully create a path to commercialization. So basically looking to solve problems that all athletes face.
Absolutely, and innovation is absolutely key in that. What role does tech play in improving the performance and experience of female athletes in particular?
Sure. So it's actually growing. Dr. Ross already said a lot of what I was going to say, so I'm not sure what I can add. I've really been enjoying the panel, the speakers. So with female tech, there's a lot of things that go into it. For example, and I'm sure Dr. Ross would agree with this, simple things like clinical trials and medical testing for a very long time were only done on men. So those results were not, which I know just kind of shake my head, right?
Yeah.
It's only fairly recently, it's like in the 90s, that there was sort of this groundswell of yes to actually include an equal number of women in these clinical studies. So that you look at that from the top level, and then that goes down. So if we're looking at data that's male specific, it's not going to bring anything to women. As you were speaking earlier about, hormones, menstrual cycle, all of that obviously is applicable only to women. And so those metrics and biometric markers are not going to be the same. So when you're creating, particularly at an elite level, but all the way down to grassroots and rec as well, if you're looking to create a coaching plan or a recovery strategy, that's going to look very different than it is for a male or for a younger player as well. So taking those metrics and making them female specific has an impact not only on the pitch, but also in athlete readiness and recovery.
And I know you said that Dr. Emma Ross had touched upon some of the subjects like concussion and the information around saliva testing about, your hormone cycle. And are there any other new exciting studies or tech developments or innovations from your perspective that are coming in for women's sport?
There are several. Dr. Ross mentioned, sports bras. We're looking at the way breast tissue actually moves. There's always been this, lock and load field where you're, compression, and no one likes that, right? That's not comfortable. So looking at the way the breast tissue actually moves. So we're actually doing a study at the University of Portsmouth with Dr. Joanna Skur, who's one of the leading breast experts in the world. And she does in-water testing, bare-breasted testing. So a huge amount of data that's coming out that really is sort of going to, I think, turn the industry on its head on how sports bras are made, maybe moving hopefully toward a personalized fit. Also with running, when you make a shoe, that the upper is based on something called a last. So traditionally, there's a size run of lasts, and those up until very recently have been built on men's feet. Guess what? Women's anatomy is different than men. So our head of bio. So we last year launched our first female running shoe called Althea, and it was based on biomechanic data gathered by Helen Wu, who is our head of biomech out at our Portland office. And it seems like just shaking my head, like, why didn't we? Of course, a woman's foot is different than a man's. We prefer a wider toe box. We generally have a narrower heel. We generally have a higher instep. So taking all of that into consideration makes for just a frictionless run for athletes. So And we're looking at it in different ways too, along with our sort of our bottoms and infusing them with moisturizer, or looking at different essential oils and toward a recovery piece. So really just looking at things that are, and we've done this through athlete insights. We talk to our athletes. We have a large roster of professional athletes as well as our university athletes, and asking them, what are your biggest pain points? What is it, what can Under Armour solve to help you make the best, not only of your game, but also getting ready for that game and then recovering afterwards.
Would you say at the moment there's quite a big focus on this at Under Armour, like women's sport in particular?
Yes, definitely. We have a new business unit that has just started. We're calling it global football. We're trying to get Americans to stop calling it soccer. That might be a lost cause. I don't know, but so Women's World Cup coming. We are doing a lot of work around our athletes and creating product designed for the female form is what that's what the mission is for them, not just in global football, but really across all of our sports. So there's a saying in the industry, you could just shrink it and pink it, right? But female consumers are not content to put up with that any longer. They want something that's built for them and a performance, and not just a cute colorway. They want they want that performance piece every bit as much as men do.
That saying is absolutely ghastly, Lauren. Shrink it and pink it.
It's
although we could get some great tops made saying that on it in an ironic way. Anyway, maybe
like a crop top, and yeah.
Exactly. That's really made me laugh. Can I ask you, going a bit more maybe serious, but so many studies show that the majority of girls stop playing sport at around age 12. Obviously, that coincides with starting your period. How can we stop that from happening? And is there work that you're doing and Under Armour are doing around that?
We really are. There's a large study that was done that said that by around 13 or 14, girls are quitting sport at twice the rate that boys are quitting. And it's for a number of reasons. Yes, it's definitely linked to puberty, and then they become more body conscious, and that body image thing comes into play. But it's also more than that. It's also, gender equity based. When girls, the most, at least that's the case in the US, many, if not most of the coaches are still men. So when they're not seeing someone who looks like them, and when they get into the older, the upper levels, and they're still not seeing female coaches and female leadership, I think that starts to discourage them a little bit. And then when you add in the pressure of being a teenager, being a teen girl, I think the statistic is 70% said they felt like they no longer belonged in sport, and they said that 67% of society doesn't encourage girls to play sport. And so then if you look at how often you see, even at the pro level, media coverage of women's sport, then you can sort of see how that kind of trails off, right? They're just not seeing it anymore. So, but it's just so important to keep them in sport and create that gender equity. It builds perseverance. It teaches them to win and lose. It teaches teamwork. So I think it's a number of things that they're going to have to, it's going to be really a wholesale change. It's going to have to encourage girls to stay in sports. It's going to have to still be fun and create that teamwork early on, so they can carry that with them through their sport journey, start in that rec league. And we as parents and adults have to encourage that and sort of advocate for them and really pull more women into female leadership roles in the sport world. And then they'll start to feel, oh, I do belong here. I see people who look just like me. This makes sense. And it'll bring that joy of sport back.
And what type of success are you seeing with this? Are you seeing success already with keeping girls in sport past the age of 12?
We are, particularly in underserved areas. So I'm at our global headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland. And another barrier to sport is, of course, money. Some of them just don't have the appropriate kit to play. So we have a new, it's not new, it's been 7 years now. It's called Project Rampart, where we outfit every varsity athlete in every high school in Baltimore City. So that removes that barrier. Everybody's got a new uniform every year. Everyone has new shoes every year. So it removes that. And so you can just come, everybody looks like a team. And so we've seen a huge, it went from, and this is the impact on playing sport. in one school, their graduation rate went from 68% to 98% over the last 7 years of this program. So it works. It seems like a simple thing, but it really does work.
Yeah, that is sensational, and gosh, like what a simple but effective thing you can do there, right? And that's just the start, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us. Just before you go, I've got one very important question. Football or soccer to you? What do you call it?
I'm really training myself to say football. Football and then American football. I mean, Under Armour was born in American football, so it's been a tough change, but I'm working on it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lauren. And that you've finished off our speaker series. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I hope to talk to you more later this year.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have finished our formal speakers, and we really hope you've enjoyed the discussion around women's sport this afternoon at our very first Everything in Sport Women's Edition virtual conference, and it's giving you a flavour of what's to come. On the 7th and 8th of June, we are having the in-person conference, and it's going to be great. I mean, you've heard some of the speakers here today. We're going to discuss all the themes that came up. Get your tickets now. It's on the Everything in Sport website, and it's an early bird offer, so please don't hesitate. And now, I've been given some questions. It's question time, everyone. You've been filling them in, I believe, behind the scenes as the conversations have gone on. And I am joined back by Power Suit Andrew.
Wearing something different in June.
No, I have mentioned it so many times. No, kidding.
Different colour at least.
Andrew, can I ask, how can we improve the representation of women without having quotas? Our favourite topic, quotas.
Yay. So definitely looking forward to June when we have more time to talk about this, because I don't think there's any true short answer. But maybe possibly different to Joanne, Rowena and some of the other speakers in terms of their views on quotas. I believe fundamentally, I don't believe we should have quotas. That said, I feel to get targets into action, so we can have possibly, an NGB who are saying we want to get X number of women participating in sports or girls of this age. Targets feel soft at this point, and one of the things that needs to be highlighted is just still how far we are from an equitable society. And just Lauren talking just previously, mentioning the need for girls to see representation of coaches, female leaders. So we need that very quickly. And the problem with targets is targets are quite often missed. We have seen that, and there is not enough accountability and explanation on that. And you can see it with gender pay gap. You get, you've got these targets of increasing the representation of women, and then you get a lovely report to say why that didn't happen, but not much more commitment other than another target. So I feel until we start seeing that gap closing, and until we start seeing, an acceleration of representation, or at least a growth and a big growth, I think quotas serve a good purpose.
Can I ask you a little bit more on that? Have you got any examples of quotas? Not like the companies necessarily, but like what type of quota could be put in place that you think is successful?
Going back to the conversation you just had with Lauren, and looking at girls' participation in sports, we historically know that there is history of specific sports and participation, be it, football is going to be very different to cheerleading, that's going to be very different to another sport. I feel it would be tracking that data and saying, right, we want to see that that drop out of, at the age of 12, the participation in sports for women or for girls in a specific sport to be this amount. And then you start holding, the NGBs get accountable for that, and they start filtering that down to a grassroots level, maybe even to a school education level, where people and our society are responsible to really boost that representation. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. Can I just ask one sub question to that? Is talking about holding like NGBs to account on those quotas, what type of sanction could be put in place, or how would you hold them to account if they missed it? What's the consequence?
Very controversial. Controversial.
Not going to hold you to it. More just thinking about, you know, what could we encourage, you know, to make people make sure they've hit it.
One of the things that we're seeing now, national governing bodies being very vocal and detailed around their EDI, their Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Action Plan, with targets in place. I would in some ways say society are holding them to account. There are specific sports I won't need to mention where there have been challenges and issues raised. They almost have got that quota because they have to see a change. What would I guess your question is, what would the sanction almost look like? I mean, I think that's possibly is at a Sport England level. Is that it's just the leaders of this country taking representation seriously enough and holding our regulators and our people, you know, governing bodies accountable for change. They're the ones that should be telling us what that looks like. I think we should then be holding them accountable for making sure they follow that through. Yeah, definitely. Well, as I said, we could talk about this all day. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but an extremely interesting conversation. So thank you. And we've got another question here, and it's for Dr. Emma Ross. Emma, I hope you're on the line in the cloud somewhere there. You're going to pop up on my screen any second, I'm sure, Emma. But what are your views on the increased ACL injuries that have been appearing in women's football? I've actually got personal experience with this as a netballer. I did my ACL 5 years ago, and it's really frequent in netball, football, and skiing and things like that, and more frequent in women, isn't it? Because of the shape of our hips being wider than our knees and that type of thing. I'll let you now give your side.
No, you could take over. You're doing a great job. Yeah, unfortunately, in game sports like netball, football, rugby, where there is lots of acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, there is lots of ACL injuries. And like you said, females are at greater risk of joint injury than males, and in particular at the knee, we're up to 6 times more likely to suffer a non-contact ACL. So it's huge, right? That's a massive disparity between boys and girls after puberty. So it's our changing bodies, our changing body shapes, and our hormones. All of these things play into why this increase in injury risk goes up. But actually, it's really complex. So yes, we have hips that are wider than males, and so therefore the angle from our hips to our knees is greater, and we can't change that. But there are so many things we can change that we know feed into this injury risk. So one of the things is that we just don't get girls moving enough when they're younger, and they don't have movement mastery by the time they get to wanting to play sport, and they almost have this skill deficit in just basic movement. So we were doing some work in football last year, and it really surprised me that the coaches said about these amazing footballers in Women's Super League, they don't move very well. And I'm like, they're amazing on the pitch, but they said actually in their fundamental movement patterns, let's say squatting, lunging, hinging, they just haven't been, because their training history hasn't exposed them to enough strength and conditioning and perhaps enough different types of movement to really build that up. But there are also some other things that we can change. And Lauren tapped into that when she was talking about footwear, because again, exclusively in all of the footballers we worked with last year, they were wearing men's boots, and men's boots aren't designed for women. They're particularly when they're technical. So they've got studs, they've got rigid soles, and they are made for the forces that are going through a man's body. And so when you put a woman, she's shorter, she's lighter, she's got less muscle mass in those boots, and they hold her on the ground because they're designed for a man's body, and then she tries to turn, they're going to hold her in the ground and increase her risk of injury. And finally, what we're seeing also is that because female sport is often not prioritized as much as their male counterparts, they get moved around pitches a lot. So the hallowed turf is for the first team men's, and the girls and the women are getting moved around from grass pitch to Astro to 3G, and changing surfaces frequently increases injury risk as well. So there are some things that we can completely change to try and reduce this ACL injury.
And are those things in progress, Emma? Are they happening? Are they moving?
I feel like they are. I feel like there's some brilliant injury surveillance going on in the women's game, particularly at football, and that will feed into some of the strategies. I think, again, like Lauren said, all the data has previously come from male bodies and male sports, so we need to collect more information. But I think, yes, we are moving in the right direction.
And I should have said it to begin with, ACL injury, for those who don't know, is in the knee, isn't it? It's the main ligament through the centre in the middle of the knee. And if it gets snapped, it's a bit of a disaster. You have to have an operation, a reconstruction, all that.
Yeah, it's not very nice. And then the risk of re-injury is greater, the risk of osteoarthritis, not to worry you, but it's greater. So we actually really want to prevent injury as much as we can.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Emma Ross. Oh, I've lost my hairdo. That's fine. We're all women here. And I've got one more question coming up, which I'm being passed. And I am joined by Rowena. Oh, we've got two questions, actually. And Rowena's back in the studio with me. Can I ask you, how much does unconscious bias affect the equality debate in women's sport? And this has obviously come from someone who's been watching today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit before, but absolutely, it's. And I think I've got to caveat this again. I mean, I'm an ex-sprinter, so in some sports, when you're treated exactly the same, it's completely normalised that actually. Women run in the same way. Maybe perhaps there's more focus on the men, but it's accepted. But certainly, I mean, I still have conversations with friends. You know, I was at the Rugby World Cup, the Women's Rugby World Cup in New Zealand last year, and they said still struggles find it really weird for women to be playing contact rugby, and I just find it amazing. You know, and again, but again, that goes to the unconscious bias element. You know, it's not their fault. It's the way that they've been brought up, thinking that women should be precious and kept inside and looked after. And I think it's quite amazing. I think and we talked about the media, the role that the media plays in all of this. You know, us not having seen women playing sport for the majority of our lives. You know, certainly from my perspective, I saw it from an athletic side, but women's football, women's rugby, it was sort of hidden away from us. So we just. You start to create this bias in your mind that these are sports that are played by men, and there are other sports, you know, and I guess tennis is one of them. But even that sort of that's grown, you know, certainly in my time of consuming sport. Yeah. You know, compared to what it was when I was younger. So it is absolutely, it's unconscious bias. How do we address it? You know, we've talked a bit about see it, be it. So, you know, actually people thinking, oh, wow, there were you know, 80,000 people in Wembley Stadium, you know, wow, so women can play, you know, but it's that whole addressing that perception.
It's behavioural change, isn't it, really?
Totally.
Yeah. Because we've heard, I'm a big fan of if you can't see it, you can't be it, but it has been around, you know, that phrase. It's quite overused in our sport world, right? We need a new one. We need the likes of, I personally don't like the phrase male ally because I feel like everyone kind of should just support like sport.
Allies, just allies.
Exactly. Friends, supporters. But yeah, is there anything in particular other than the, you know, getting more sport in front of people that we can do to get around this or improve upon the unconscious bias effect?
Well, it's social stigmas as well. So, you know, I think there's, you know, you talked a little bit with Joanne, but, you know, this whole, how do we keep young girls in sport? And again, it's not just women, it's diversity across the board. You know, boys often play more sport, but there are still some boys who don't for whatever reason there are. But how do we keep young people in sport? And, you know, that goes to communities. I'm obviously Asian, and I see that, you know, in Sri Lanka at home, all children play sport, but as soon as you bring the immigrant populations into the UK, there's a real focus on academia. Perhaps it's frowned upon, and it's changing these social stigmas around that. So it's not just a women's issue, it's actually across the board diversity.
Absolutely. And do you think that broadcasters and our you know, media companies have a responsibility to do their bit and show more women's sport than they already are, even if they're not getting the money or the viewers for it at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting debate, and as someone who works in the commercial side of sport, it's how do you weigh these things up? Because ultimately there has to be these are all businesses, and, you know, they're not charitable organisations, but actually, you know, what we're seeing is that actually watching, you know, the Euro effect, that actually people are watching a lot more women's sport generally. As a result of the Euro, it's not just football. So actually, it is that whole thing that actually, if we put it on, if we make it accessible, and again, it, you know, I think for sports like women's sports, it is actually free to wear that's the important element.
Yes.
So to answer your point, is absolutely. It is there's duty. I just want to touch upon. I read an article over someone's shoulder yesterday, or a headline, that there's some survey done that actually people feel that there's over-representation of minorities on TV at the moment, and I just found it such a misleading headline for the media to have put out there, because also what are you benchmarking it against? You know, do people actually know what our actual natural representation is? And that's male, female, that's all minorities. And then actually how are the questions being asked in this way? And do people, you know, you do hear it probably that there's so many more women now commentating on sport and things like that, when actually, is it really? Or is it just there's more? And it feels like, we're finally addressing balances. Yeah.
I got a comment the other day saying that I was infiltrating male broadcasting. As if male broadcasting...
They own it.
Exactly. But here we are, infiltrating away. But anyway, thank you so much, Rowena. That's super insightful. And we've got one more question before we wrap up for today. We've got two more questions. Sorry. They keep coming. The next question is for Lauren. Which I hope you're going to appear on my screen. Yay! I've got you. I'm going to ask, what can we do to get more female founder sports tech companies promoted or funded? Yes.
Yes, huge problem, right? I think it's something less than 3% of female-founded startups get 3% of the VC funding. So I think there are several things. I love your comment about male allies. I prefer to just call it allies or advocacy. You know, so the VC world has been traditionally male. It's men who are writing the checks. It's men who are making decisions on what investments are to be made. So there'll have to be changes made there. And I think it goes even earlier than that, and that is to encouraging girls to study what had said traditionally were male subjects. So engineering, innovation, maths, I think you say.
We do.
So I think starting that early, you know, encouraging them in that path, and so by the time they get to college, they have no qualms about majoring in business or finance or any of those subjects. So it has to start at that grassroots level, and then on the other side of it, it's going to take advocacy for people who are in positions of power to, you know, take that risk and support women, you know, and their companies. And once you start to see that building and success come, it's why I'm involved with everything in sport. It's, you know, I go out of my way to try to find female-founded startups and support them every way that I can, source them, elevate them. And it's going to take everyone to do that for us to make this. There's a lot of ground that needs to be made up, but it's not impossible. We just have to all link arms and make change for the better.
Absolutely. And personally, I co-founded a business, and to be honest, I didn't know I wanted to until I did it. And I've co-founded it with two males. But I tell you what, it felt like there wasn't really a place for me. Like, I didn't ever see the space there. But now I'm part of like a female founders community, and my goodness, that empowering. I mean, have you found that?
It's huge. Yeah, I mean, there's a group called Women in Sports Tech here in the U.S. They're fantastic. There are more and more, you know, female-founded groups where they can kind of get together and create this advocacy network. And then I think that more that grows, that it will become more accepted. And when I look at a startup now, when I'm hearing a pitch, my two questions are right around diversity and equity and inclusion. Like, how many females are on your team? How many female are on your advisory board? How many female investors do you have? And if that's not there, then that's a big point of contention for me every time I hear a pitch. I need to see that, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's better for business. I mean, all the studies in the world show you that diversity equals, you know, business success.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Hallelujah to that. And I love watching the journey of so many different female-founded companies, and I look forward to seeing many more. Lauren, thank you once again. And I've been told this is the last question, looking from my team. So Rob Young from Switch the Play, we talked about the importance of education for sportswomen. How does that support the quest for greater diversity in the workforce across sport?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think probably I'll just build on from where Lauren finished there, because we all know that a more diverse workforce equals better outcomes in business. The evidence is there. It's clear and plain to why that's important. We also know that sport hasn't got it as right as it could do, and we're getting better. But like some of the conversations today have clearly highlighted that. So actually, the opportunities, you've got some amazing sportswomen who have got incredible transferable skills. How can we support them to find pathways back into sport? And this isn't about like narrow focus around coaching, although coaching is an area where women are massively underrepresented when you particularly look at like Olympic and Paralympic sport, for example. But actually, it's like if your passion's in media or in marketing or in finance, well, there's loads of those careers and jobs in sport. So how can we find those opportunities for sportswomen to actually find their way back in as practitioners, administrators, marketeers, on boards to greater diversify the workforce? But you've got amazing individuals that can offer so much. So why do we want to lose that talent to other sectors? Other sectors see it. So actually, what a great opportunity it is for sport to actually harness the talent that we have and support them in, and actually better fulfill the duty of care that we have as well.
Absolutely. Well, you actually end on a really important note there, and kind of what Everything in Sport, the women's edition, is all about, in the fact that here at Everything in Sport, they're trying to drive towards gender equal sports industry. But in turn, that will mean for a better and more equal, like community, world, country overall. And so it's not just sport limiting, is it? But Rob, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Look forward to chatting more in June. And now to everyone at home, we are just a couple of minutes from finishing up. Really hope you've enjoyed everything today. You can please get in touch with any more questions or anything at Everything in Sport on social media. And also you can contact and connect with the speakers via the likes of LinkedIn. We have got all of the speakers who will be attending the event. We have got them listed up on the Everything in Sport website. That early bird offer is currently still on, so do get it before it goes up in price. We've obviously just got a couple of months until we'll be back here at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on the 7th and 8th of June. And we've got a special announcement. In fact, we'd like to make this today because it's hot off the press, basically, that we will have Marie Salwa, who on day 2 of the conference, she is the Corporate and Sustainable Development Director at the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. And we're super excited to have someone like Marie join us, and that the IOC are supporting us in Everything in Sport's mission, and especially with the sustainability angle, which is very close to my heart, and with women in sport. And just before we absolutely close for today, I have got David back with me, David Kraling, who is CEO of the Omnia Sports Group. Can you just give us a bit of a sum up of how today's been? Yeah, what did you think?
Well, it's been amazing, but I know that's a tough thing to do, really, because for me, the last few hours have been so important. They've been inspirational, and it enforces the absolute why we have to continue on this journey. And for us at Everything in Sport, just to provide a platform maybe to encourage discussion, encourage honest feedback, talk about the things that we got wrong, celebrate the things that we got right, and actually start by making some systemic change for the future, which will take time, we know that. And for me, one of the core things absolutely is to make sure that we're doing it equal and a fair way. And it's a thank you to you, Jess, really as well, for enabling us to have such a seamless way of having a discussion around the world. And when I looked at the statistics, and I said this earlier today, I know all 5 continents around the world discussing the same topic. So again, that concretes to why we must make the journey, and we must continue together, and we'll make change together. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone who has been watching at home or in the office or wherever you are around the world. This has been the Women in Sport conference, virtual conference, ahead of the one in June. And one more thing before we go is that if you do know of any female tech founders or an investor looking for a new opportunity, then please have a browse at the Power Play section of our website. It's sponsored by Under Armour, and it'll be supporting female tech founders on their quest for growth and investment. And as we know, this is such an important place to be growing that area, and it will always lead to good things for women's sport. So just want to say thank you everyone at home. Please leave your comments and everything on on social media, get in touch with us. Make sure you book your early bird tickets, and we'll be back for the in-person conference of Everything in Sport Women's Edition at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on the 7th and 8th of June. Thank you and have a great evening.